There's a story about a man who worked for decades at a job he didn't hate but didn't love either. The pay was good. The title impressed people at dinner parties. From the outside, it looked like success. But every Sunday evening, the same feeling crept in, a quiet heaviness. Not panic, not misery, just the sense that his time didn't quite belong to him. Years later, after saving diligently and keeping his life simpler than his income allowed, he did something radical. He quit. No dramatic exit, no lottery win. Just enough money to make his next move optional. What surprised him most wasn't the relief. It was how small the change looked from the outside and how massive it felt on the inside. Here's what's interesting about that story. His wealth didn't buy luxury, it bought control. That's the part most people miss. We're taught that money is about buying things, nicer things, bigger things, more things. But for many people who had enough of it, the real value of money turns out to be something quieter. Freedom. Think about how rarely we define wealth that way. We point to net worth numbers, salaries, lifestyles, but those are visible. Freedom is not. And because it's invisible, it's often undervalued. This brings us to the central paradox. The ultimate goal of money is to give you control over your time. Yet most financial decisions people make trade time for stuff. Nobody's crazy for doing this. Stuff is tangible. It's immediate. Time freedom is abstract. It exists in the future. And humans are notoriously bad at valuing future benefits over present rewards. But once you experience even a small amount of control over your time, the hierarchy flips. Suddenly, freedom outranks almost everything else. That leads to the first big idea. Freedom is the highest dividend money can pay. Dividends are supposed to be cash, but the most valuable payout isn't dollars. It's the ability to decide what you do tomorrow. Think about someone who can take a day off without asking permission, or say no to work that drains them, or leave a bad situation because they're not financially cornered. Those are privileges, and they don't show up on a paycheck. Here's the paradox. You can earn a lot of money and still have very little freedom. I know people with high incomes who feel trapped. Their lifestyle requires constant motion. Their expenses assume uninterrupted success. Their calendar is full months in advance. From the outside, they look wealthy. From the inside, they're fragile. Contrast that with someone earning less but needing even less. They may not look impressive, but they can pause. They can pivot. They can wait. That's power. Historically, this distinction has always existed. In earlier centuries, landowners weren't wealthy because of what they spent, but because of what they controlled. Time, labor, options. Meanwhile, people with flashy wealth often depended on favor, debt, or unstable income. Same psychology today. Different wrapper. The invisible part is dependency. How many things have to go right for your life to stay okay? When your answer to that question shrinks, freedom grows. Which leads to the second idea. The cost of freedom is often invisible, but it's always there. Freedom isn't expensive in the way we think. It doesn't usually require extreme wealth. What it requires is restraint, and restraint rarely looks impressive. Living below your means, keeping fixed costs low, not upgrading every time you can. These decisions don't feel like progress. They feel like standing still while others move forward. Here's the paradox. Standing still financially can move you forward psychologically. I know someone who resisted lifestyle upgrades for years. Friends assumed they were being cautious, maybe even missing out. What they were really doing was buying optionality. Every dollar not committed to a fixed expense was a vote for future freedom. Nobody applauds that. There's no status reward for margin. But when something unexpected happens, margin is everything. Think about how often people stay in jobs they dislike because leaving feels too risky. That risk usually isn't about ambition. It's about obligations, rent, debt, expectations. Freedom doesn't come from quitting your job. It comes from being able to. Here's where evolutionary psychology helps explain why this is so hard. Our ancestors survived by securing immediate resources. Food today mattered more than flexibility tomorrow. That instinct still drives us. Spend now, enjoy now, worry later. But modern life punishes that instinct. It rewards people who delay gratification long enough to gain control. Understanding this doesn't make the trade-off easy. It just explains why it feels unnatural. I struggle with this too. The urge to use money to improve comfort right now is strong. It feels rational. But over time, you notice how those comforts quietly reduce your range of choices, which brings us to the third idea. Freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about not being forced to do what you don't want. That distinction matters. When people imagine freedom, they often picture endless leisure, travel, hobbies, zero responsibility. That's not how it usually shows up. Real freedom is subtle. It's declining a meeting. It's changing direction. It's waiting instead of rushing. It's saying no without panic. Here's the paradox. The most powerful form of freedom is rarely dramatic. Think about people who have to keep running just to stay in place. Every month requires performance. Every year requires growth. That pressure doesn't come from lack of talent. It comes from lack of flexibility. Meanwhile, people with modest needs and some savings often appear calm in situations that stress others out. Not because they're braver, because they have options. Historically, you see this in downturns. Those with margin endure. Those without it scramble. Same event, different exposure. The invisible part is emotional stability. Freedom reduces fear. Fear drives bad decisions. That feedback loop is hard to see until you're inside it. Money that buys freedom reduces the number of decisions you have to make under stress, and decisions made under low stress tend to be better. This is why freedom compounds. Once you have a little, it's easier to get more. Less panic, better choices, more patience. But there's a catch. Freedom is fragile if you don't protect it. Many people get a taste of it and then give it back. They earn more, then upgrade everything. They regain dependence. The cycle restarts. Nobody's crazy for doing this. Social pressure is real. Comparison is powerful. The world constantly nudges you to trade freedom for appearance. Understanding that trade-off is the first step to resisting it. And that's where this conversation deepens. Because if freedom is the ultimate form of wealth, then most of what we chase financially is a distraction, or worse, a trade in the wrong direction. Why do smart people give up freedom so easily? Why does success so often increase pressure instead of relieving it? And how do you build a financial life that protects your ability to choose? Those questions take us beyond money and into psychology. That's where we'll go next. There's a story about a woman who reached what most people would call financial success in her mid-30s. Strong income, respect in her field. A life that looked, from the outside, carefully optimized. And yet, when she was asked a simple question, what would you do differently if money weren't a concern? She froze. Not because she lacked imagination, but because she hadn't practiced freedom in so long that she didn't know what it felt like anymore. Here's what's interesting about that moment. Losing freedom rarely feels dramatic. It happens quietly, one sensible decision at a time. This brings us to the fourth idea. Success often reduces freedom before it increases it. That sounds backward. We assume the opposite. Work hard now, sacrifice now, and freedom comes later. Sometimes that happens. Often it doesn't. Because success has a way of expanding obligations faster than it expands options. More income invites more commitments. Bigger homes, more responsibility, higher expectations. Each step feels deserved. Each one makes sense. But together, they tighten the system. Here's the paradox. The better you're doing, the harder it can be to change direction. Nobody's crazy for falling into this. Society rewards visible progress, promotions, growth, scale. It rarely rewards optionality. And because of that, people confuse momentum with freedom. Think about history. In the industrial age, stability meant safety, a steady job, a predictable routine, a clear hierarchy. Freedom wasn't the goal. Survival was. That mindset still echoes today, even though the world has changed. Modern work rewards flexibility, creativity, and adaptability. Yet we still build lives optimized for stability at all costs. And stability, when taken too far, becomes rigidity. The invisible part is that rigidity increases fear. Fear of losing status. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of stepping off a path that looks successful. Fear doesn't come from lack of money. It comes from lack of options. This leads to the fifth idea. Freedom is psychological before it's financial. People often assume that once they reach a certain net worth, freedom will automatically arrive. But freedom isn't a switch, it's a muscle. And if you don't use it, money alone won't activate it. I've seen people with enough money to walk away from work, but who still feel trapped. Not by bills, by identity, by expectations, by the story they've told themselves about who they are supposed to be. Here's what's interesting about that. The chains are often invisible, and they're often self-made. Evolutionary psychology explains part of this. Humans are wired to seek belonging. Status within a group once meant survival. Today, that instinct shows up as career identity, financial comparison, and fear of standing out in the wrong way. So, even when we can afford freedom, we hesitate to use it. Here's the paradox. The greatest obstacle to freedom is not money, it's the fear of judgment. Think about how many people delay changes they want to make because of how it will look. Taking a lower-paying job, starting over, stepping back, pausing. These choices often increase freedom and happiness, yet feel risky because they don't fit the expected script. Nobody talks about this, but freedom often requires disappointing people who benefited from your lack of it. That's uncomfortable. And because it's uncomfortable, people stay put. This is why understanding freedom as wealth matters so much. When freedom is the goal, decisions get reframed. Instead of asking, will this make me look successful? You ask, will this increase or decrease my control? That single question changes behavior. It doesn't mean you stop caring about progress. It means you redefine it. The invisible wealth here is autonomy, the ability to act in line with your values instead of external pressure. Modern examples of this are everywhere. People leaving high-paying jobs to regain time. People downsizing not because they failed, but because they succeeded. People choosing flexibility over prestige. From the outside, these moves can look irrational. From the inside, they feel like relief. Here's another paradox. What looks like quitting is often choosing. The real skill isn't earning freedom once, it's protecting it over time. Freedom has enemies: lifestyle inflation, comparison, ego, fear. Each one quietly nudges you back toward dependence. That's why so many people who achieve financial independence later re-enter stressful situations. They mistake stimulation for meaning, or comfort for happiness, or momentum for purpose. Understanding this doesn't make the path obvious, it just makes the trade-offs visible. Freedom isn't about escaping responsibility. It's about choosing which responsibilities you accept. And that choice is profoundly psychological. Once you see that, the goal of money becomes clearer. Not maximum wealth, not early retirement, but sustainable independence. Enough money to make decisions calmly, enough margin to wait, enough control to change your mind. That version of wealth rarely looks impressive, but it feels powerful. We've talked about freedom from work, freedom from obligation, freedom from fear. But there's another layer that matters just as much: freedom from comparison. Because even with time and money, if you're constantly measuring yourself against others, you're still not free. That's where this conversation heads next. There's a story about two people who retired in the same year with roughly the same amount of money. On paper, their situations were identical. In practice, their experiences couldn't have been more different. One spent their days relaxed, curious, and content. The other was restless, anxious, constantly second-guessing their decisions. The difference wasn't markets or math, it was mindset. One had defined freedom as independence. The other had defined it as comparison. Here's what's interesting. You can have time, money, and options, and still feel trapped if you're measuring yourself against someone else's version of success. This brings us to the sixth idea. Freedom disappears the moment comparison enters the room. Comparison is subtle. It doesn't announce itself as jealousy. It often shows up as motivation, as awareness, as just staying informed. But slowly, it replaces your goals with borrowed ones. Nobody's crazy for this. Humans have always learned by observing others. It's how we survived. But in a world of constant visibility, that instinct can hijack your sense of enough. Here's the paradox. The more examples of success you see, the harder it becomes to feel successful. This is especially true with money. There's always someone earning more, retiring earlier, living better. If your sense of freedom depends on being ahead, you'll never arrive. The invisible part is contentment, and contentment is a form of freedom. Think about history. A century ago, people compared themselves to neighbors. Today, we compare ourselves to the top fraction of the world, curated and filtered. Same instinct. completely different scale. That scale makes freedom fragile. The seventh and final idea is this: freedom is choosing your own scoreboard. When you define success internally, money becomes a tool instead of a measuring stick. It supports your life instead of judging it. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care about different things: time over trophies, control over applause, enough over more. Here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to prove freedom, you finally experience it. Let's come full circle. The man who quit his job didn't do it to escape work. He did it to reclaim choice. The woman who couldn't answer what she'd do if money weren't a concern learned that freedom needs practice. The people who looked successful but felt trapped weren't failing. They were just playing the wrong game. Knowing this doesn't make the trade-offs easy. You'll still feel the pull of status, the fear of falling behind, the temptation to optimize everything. Everyone does. But once you see freedom as the ultimate form of wealth, those pulls lose some of their power. You start asking different questions. Not how much can I make, but how much do I need? Not what will impress others, but what will give me peace. Not what's next, but is this enough? Those questions don't lead to flashy answers. They lead to honest ones. And honest answers build resilient lives. Money can buy many things: comfort, security, experiences. But its highest purpose is quiet. It's the ability to wake up and decide how your day will unfold, to say no without fear, to change course without panic. That kind of wealth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't trend. It doesn't ask for validation. But once you have it, you stop chasing almost everything else. If this reframed how you think about money, sit with it. Because the way you define wealth determines the life you build. And freedom in the end isn't about escaping responsibility. It's about choosing it. That's why freedom is the ultimate form of wealth.